Hi, Steve Cassidy here. I'm going to talk today about CSS, a cascading style sheets language that we use for applying style to web pages. And in particular, I want to talk about a little website called the CSS Zen Garden, cssszengarden.com. This is actually a very old website. It's been around for a long time, and it's a sort of place to, or was a place where people developed CSS style sheets for pages and sort of showed off their skills. And it was developed at a time when CSS wasn't widely used. It wasn't the main way that people styled web pages. These days CSS is very widely used and is sort of very well accepted, and so this is sort of a bit of a novelty. But it's interesting for us because it illustrates, for people who are not familiar with CSS, it illustrates the range of different things that you can do using CSS. The idea behind the page is that there is one fixed HTML page and then different CSS style sheets are applied to that page. And so this is the default one that you get at the moment when you go to the page, and you can see that the layout of this is okay, it's quite nice, but we can flip to a different style sheet and we get a very different view. You can see the URL here has 221 as a style sheet number, and this is a particular design. So here's the same, exactly the same HTML page, but with a very different style sheet. We get a totally different look and feel to the page. Different images are used in backgrounds, different colors, fonts and layouts and so on. And similarly, let's look at another one here, number 2, Zen Garments. Again, the same content, totally different look and feel. So this is achieved by applying just a different CSS style sheet to the page. There's a robot named Jimmy jumping up and so on. Different style sheet to the page, and everything that you see here is done using CSS, not using JavaScript or changing the HTML in any way. So it's an interesting idea. We can have a look at this, and it's sort of quite a nice little playground for experimenting with CSS design. We can have a look at this with one of the things that you can download the HTML file yourself and a sample CSS file that's got some style in it, and you can actually sort of have a go at it yourself. So I thought that's what I would do in this little talk, just to explore a few things and to sort of point the way for sort of working on this kind of task, but also, you know, developing and working in CSS. So I have the page that I've downloaded here. This is the HTML page. You can see the content is here that we see in the page, and each of the divs that make up this section. So we've got sections, we've got divs, and they've got a lot of classes and IDs on them. So here this is class main, and it's class supporting, and it's got an ID Zen supporting. So this means that for any of these divs, and they've all got different identifiers and classes, we can target them with a CSS rule and make them look a particular way. And that's how we're able to have such different layouts that sort of have big effects on the way that the page is laid out. So here's another one, and so you can see they're all quite different in the way that they lay out the page, they move the blocks around and so on. So what we want to do is to write a style sheet. So here I've got my style sheet, and I'm going to apply it to this page. So the first thing to do is to have a look at it in the browser. So I'm working in PyCharm here, and we'll open it in my default browser, which is here. And so here you can see the page, and this is without any CSS at all. We see this this layout, which is just very plain. So our goal is to add a little bit of style to that to make it look a little bit nicer. And the way we go about this is to basically look at the elements that we've got here. Now what we really do when we were doing this is we'd come up with a design. So we'd get up a piece of paper and we'd sketch out a design that we'd want to use, and then we'd work towards achieving that design using the CSS. I'm not going to go that far here. I'm really just going to illustrate some of the things that we might do. So the first thing to notice is in any page, we want to set some sort of defaults overall for the page. The default font in the web is a serif font here, something like Times New Roman. If I wanted to set a better default font for the page, I would set a property on the body element. So I'm going to, my first rule in the style sheet that I'm going to write is going to be for the body, and I'm going to have a font family, and I'm going to use Trebuchet as a font. So Trebuchet is a nice sans serif font, and because not every system might have Trebuchet, although it's very widespread, I also use the generic name sans serif as a default. So the CSS rule says basically the font family should be Trebuchet, and if you can't find that, use whatever your default sans serif font is. And I'm also going to set a margin on the page of 4 ems. Now, M is the width of an M, a letter M. So we're setting that page there, that style there. So what I should see is the font should change, and we get a margin. So everything's come in just a little bit, and we've got a slightly nicer, well, different anyway, font for the page. And so now what we need to do is look at the overall page structure. So we can use the power of our editor here to have a look at the structure. So actually I'd already done that. You can fold different bits of the page, and so what we see is that we've actually got the first thing here, which is a section, which is the intro. Second thing here is a div called main, and then the last thing is an aside called sidebar. So what I can do is to apply some styling to sort of get this overall structure within these 3 different bits. So let's look at this first bit at the moment, this section at the top. This has got our header, the banner, it's got a bit of a summary of the page and so on. So let's apply a little bit of styling to that. I'll just apply a little rule. I've copied and I'll copy and paste a couple of things in, and then I'll talk about them, what I'm doing, so save you watching me type, which is not very interesting. So what I've got here is I'm targeting the dot intro, so that's the thing that is of class intro there, and I'm going to set the width to 50%. So that it takes up half of the room on the page. The margins will be auto, and that means that it will be centered on the page. So auto means that apply a margin equally on each side. So we're shrinking the size of the content here and lining it up on the center of the page. Next, I'm going to style the H1 that is in here. So this is this H1 there, the CSS Zen Garden part, inside the intro. I'm going to give it a background color. Now, where did I get my background color, my colors from? I actually went to this site, coolers.co, but there are lots of them around, and I chose a color scheme because personally I'm not very good at colors, and so I chose a color scheme that I thought looked, well, actually pretty horrible, but we have some color names here. So I'm using that one, the purple color for the background color on the intro, on the heading, and then a main color I'm using this yellow color here to be my yellow. So I've got my yellow on purple, which should look really cool, and I'm then saying it's going to be centered and with 10 pixels of padding around the heading. And then the H2, which is the next line, the beauty of CSS design, is going to be styled with another color. That's the one of those two. This EA is one of these red colors, and that's going to be centered as well. So that's my new style sheet. Save that, and so now I can go back and what we have here. So a beautiful purple on with a orange text or yellow text, and then red underneath, and then the whole thing is centered and narrower. So there's my styling for this block. Isn't that beautiful? No, it's not. But it's sort of trying to illustrate just the layout of the page. Now let's move on to the next bit. So the next bit is these other sections. We can have a look at the style here. So if we have a look there, so look at the kind of content we have. What we have is a div called main, with a class main and supporting, and then a number of divs inside that. Now I could do a whole bunch of things with that. I just want to play or exercise the flex layout in CSS. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to write a rule for main, which is that container for that whole lot. So the main class, that's this thing here. And we're going to treat I want to treat each of these blocks as a separate block within the main. So I'm going to use what is called flex layout. So I'm going to say the display here is flex. Now you can look up flex layout, and we'll give some pointers in the notes for finding out all about that. Flex layout basically allows you to move things around within the page. It allows sort of flexible layout of blocks within another block. I'm going to set the width to 90% of the page, so make it just a little bit narrower, and I'm going to have the flex wrap feature as wrap. That means that my blocks within, so basically what's going to happen is that each of these things in here is going to become a little block on its own. I'm going to lay those out so that they go one after another in the page, boom, boom, boom. The default direction is left to right, so we'll see how that works. And then everything's going to go. And I'm going to say margin is auto on here. Okay, so let's see what that does in the page. Well, at the moment it doesn't do anything. Made it a little bit narrower. We've got a narrow margin, so we haven't actually achieved anything. The reason is divs within the main. So these things here, now what's actually happening is that they are flexing, but because they are just as wide as the page, then we don't actually see them doing anything. So if we set the width of those to be, say, 20%, then we should do that. And what we will see is that each of these now has a fixed width, and because we set that flex property on the main part, on the parent, they sort of basically flop into each other and they lay themselves out there like that on the page. Now we can also then do a margin of 10 points, say, so 10 pixels, and they'll space them out just a little bit. So now we've got our 4 divs spaced out along the page. When you're doing things like this, it's sometimes useful to sort of understand what's going on by putting a border around the thing. So one PX solid red should give us a border around there, and one PX solid green. So we should see now these things outlined. So if you want to sort of see what's happening and understand what's happening, you can use that to sort of visualize the blocks that you're doing, just like as a temporary drawing space. So I might want to put a little bit of, for example, I could put some space around this, 5px, so that gives me a little space within that block. In fact, now I've drawn those blocks, I quite like the ones, at least the green ones, so I might keep those in my design. And what we can do is we might actually so let's get rid of the red ones, and then we might try some rounded corners on those blocks, because rounded corners are always cool. And I can't remember how to do rounded corners, so let's go and have a look at it. It's the border radius property. So let's say the border radius here was 10 pixels, let's say. Let's do a 10 pixel border radius and see what cool rounded corners we get. So there we have our 4 divs that we've targeted. We've now got 4 columns in there, and so I'm not going to go much further than this, but this sort of gives you the idea of looking at the CSS that you've got and sort of trying to realize a design for your page within the confines of the HTML content that you've got, and the rules of CSS. CSS is actually a hugely powerful language that allows you to do quite complicated things, quite interesting effects, and so attacking a problem like this, which we will ask you to do for the assignment, is actually a great way to exercise your skills and develop your skills in producing CSS designs. So that's just my little look at the CSS Zen Garden. Thanks very much.